Lesson 26, Mark 11. We're going to look through the first 14 verses here tonight. Come on in. Most of this obviously is going to be taken up with what has become known as the triumphal entry into Jerusalem. And so let me read these first 11 verses of Mark chapter 11.
There's one thing that's
Useful.
We're in Mark 11, starting in verse 1. Now, when they drew near Jerusalem to Bethphage and Bethany at the Mount of Olives, he sent two of his disciples and said to them, "Go into the village opposite you, and as soon as you have entered it, you will find a colt tied on which no one has sat. Loose it and bring it. And if anyone says to you, 'Why are you doing this?' say, 'The Lord has need of it,' and immediately he will send it here." So they went their way and found the colt tied by the door outside on the street, and they loosed it.
It's the pond in the grass.
But some of those who stood there said to them, "What are you doing, loosing the colt?" And they spoke to them just as Jesus had commanded, so they let them go. Then they brought the colt to Jesus and threw their clothes on it, and he sat on it. And many spread their clothes on the road, and others cut down leafy branches from the trees and spread them on the road. Then those who went before and those who followed cried out, saying, "Hosanna! Blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord. Blessed is the kingdom of our father David that comes in the name of the Lord. Hosanna in the highest." And Jesus went into Jerusalem and into the temple. So when he had looked around at all things, as the hour was already late, he went out to Bethany with the 12. I've always found that to be such a kind of a letdown after the big ride in. It's like, let's go look at the temple and then we'll go home. So can you do me a favor and close that blind?
yeah, because I'm gonna move over to that chair.
Oh, you are? Why?
That way Nathaniel can sit.
Okay. Well, you're just going to be off. You'll be off camera. Huh?
Yeah, she will.
Yeah. It's all right. You can still speak up.
Yeah.
Why don't you slide your chair a little bit so we can see
You
you?
wanna be in the
Yes, you do. Yes, you do. Preston and I just had this conversation this afternoon. It's like, you can't be a mystery person on the Bible study.
Be the mystery
I don't,
person.
doesn't
Even if
really
I
matter
sit
what you want.
here, you still can't see me.
Well, you can. No. Good evening. Hi. We got seats for you. You don't need your camping chair.
There's no footrest for those though.
Oh, jeez. See, he's going to sit over there anyway.
He has a point.
Hey, you should buy a footrest and serve your people.
Out of all the kids, I would have never.
I don't
You
even know
have
what I
to have
stopped.
a foot.
I don't know what I stepped into here, but I'm stepping in fully.
Yeah, you really, really are. All right, moving on. All right.
Hey, yeah.
So Jesus enters Jerusalem. You notice that the way that Mark writes it, that it says he drew near to Jerusalem, to Bethphage and Bethany, and really, from what I understand, is the way the geography is that if you're coming up the hill from Jericho, you would come to Bethany first, and Bethany's on the Mount of Olives. You get to that first before you get to Jerusalem, and so Bethany is on the other side of the Mount of Olives from Jerusalem. So even though they're only 2 miles from the city, they can't see Jerusalem because they've got a mountain, kind of like we've got this mountain. So we couldn't see on the other side. And then it seems like Bethphage, which they're not really completely sure where it is, probably was on the Mount of Olives, but on the other side. So they could basically see into Jerusalem. So about 2 miles, about a mile, and then into Jerusalem. So that's kind of the lay of the land. And so we see here that Jesus, we're in Mark 11, by the way. There.
Thank you.
Yes, sir. That Jesus has these two unnamed disciples procure the colt of a donkey. And so what's interesting, though, and we're going to ask this question as we get down into this, but you know, Mark doesn't really overtly connect Jesus to the fervor of the crowd. As you look through these 11 verses, I mean, first off, it takes 6 verses of the 11 to get the donkey, right? So now we've got 5 verses to get basically Jesus into Jerusalem. And as a matter of fact, verse 11 is he's in Jerusalem looking at the temple. So essentially, the triumphal entry is in Mark is 4 verses of scripture, right? I mean, just not a whole lot there. Now, let me continue on. You'll notice that it shows the main part, other than the fact that they're throwing down clothes and throwing down the palm fronds, is that they were singing from what is Psalm 118. Okay, that's one of the Egyptian Hallel psalms, which they would normally sing when they were coming to Jerusalem for one of the festivals, right? And so that's what they're singing. So in some of the commentary said, well, really, they would be singing that anyway. And so you have to ask yourself the question, how connected were they to the song and who it was who was coming in and all that sort of thing. But we're gonna talk through that a little bit. I'm not going to spend the time tonight to go look at all of these parallels. Obviously, I've got them in the bubble over there. Matthew 21, 10 and 11, Luke 19, 39 and 40, and John 12, 12 and 12, 17 through 19 all associate Jesus' work and fame with the people's frenzy, right? Either saying, they've all gone off to him, or in John saying, you need to quiet your people, and Jesus saying, if they're quiet, even the rocks will cry out, right? And so there's a connection between the people's celebration and Jesus being there in a different way in the other gospel accounts versus what we see in Mark. Mark just really pops it and keeps going. Okay. So it's something that you need to remember is this would be John 12 would be the parallel. In John 11, the whole chapter in John 11 was about Jesus raising Lazarus from the dead, basically. And then the plot to get rid of him and Jesus in the aftermath. And so John makes it especially vivid that these people are pretty fired up about who Jesus is as they were going into Jerusalem, at least who they think he is, if I can say it that way. So a couple of other thoughts and then we'll do some questions. So first off, palm branches had been a symbol of Jewish nationalism since back in the days of the Maccabees, 200 years prior to that. So they even had it on their money. So that's something that should give us a clue about what they were thinking. And then over in 2 Kings 9:13, we see a passage where they're celebrating King Jehu, and the people lay their clothes on the steps. And so that was kind of an understood symbol of respect and yielding to authority that the people would have to lay their clothes down. And so that's kind of where that comes from. And then finally, Matthew, unlike Mark, Matthew quotes Zechariah 9:9 to explain that what Jesus was doing was not happenstance. And I will actually do that passage where we see this in chapter 21 there, the whole situation with him getting the donkey. And then Matthew records in verse 4 of chapter 21, all this was done that it might be fulfilled, which was spoken by the prophet, saying, tell the daughter of Zion, behold, your king is coming to you, lowly and sitting on a donkey, a colt, the foal of a donkey. Okay, so he was connecting that prophecy with what Jesus was doing. It's also interesting, some people have drawn a comparison to the blessing that Jacob gives at the end of Genesis, in Genesis chapter 49, in relation to Judah. And there's a connection with the colt as well. It's a little more tenuous than what we see here in Zechariah 9:9. Okay, so let me pause there. Questions or comments just about all of that, and then we'll do some questions from me.
Are most of those different in the different Matthew, Mark, and John recordings? Do they all have his instruction of going and getting the colt?
Yeah, the three synoptic gospels, Matthew, Mark, and Luke, have that. John does not have that.
John doesn't.
No, John doesn't have that, which that's kind of typical John. He just, he would not do what the other guys did. That wasn't important to him. So, but yeah, the other guys have got that in one form or another. Matthew's the only one that has the donkey and the colt both. And it's not that they weren't both there. The other two guys just focused on the one he rode on, if you will. Yeah. Okay. If that makes sense. Other questions or thoughts? All right. So what do you guys think about this? Because I mean, I said it in Mark, and Matthew and Luke have it as well. Why did the gospel writers emphasize the disciples getting the colt? I mean, in Mark's case, there's more verbiage, there's more sentences and words about getting the colt than there is about the actual ride into the city. So what's the big deal with these guys getting the colt? What are they trying to tell us there, do you think?
Colt is an equestrian animal that's never been ridden before.
Okay.
Back of a horse, mule, donkey, whatever, that's never been ridden. His faith that he can ride it is also telling us he's in control. He doesn't have fear of this animal that's never been ridden before.
Yeah, you're kind of jumping in on my second question, Chris. That's fine.
Sorry.
No. It's all good. It's all good. I think there is some reality to what you're talking about, that he has control over all of creation, right? It's where you're heading.
Well, if you got a brigade of going to one place, Jerusalem, this is kind of already foretold. The disciples all know this. So to kind of send two out ahead of him, it's kind of breaking the pack of giving it a little bit more fodder to the conversation of coming into town. I don't know. It just is a different dynamic of, instead of just everyone marching in.
So, is your thought there that Jesus is still coordinating as they go?
Well, I mean, you got all this buildup of, you have all this buildup of talk about kind of what you're going to do, what's going on, and then it's like, oh, wait a minute, I got this guy, we just got this, we'll bring a colt, like it's like a task ish verse, then what's about to happen. It's like, get this, and then once that gets done, and then they're already pretty much there.
Okay, all right. So what I hear in the midst of what you're saying there is that this idea that they're participating, right, in this act. They're still participants in what's going on.
Mm-hmm.
For what it's worth.
Yeah,
Yeah.
they got the call to go do something. Be with this. Yes.
Okay. All right.
I
They're
was,
definitely in it.
I was thinking in that idea, it's kind of a heraldic function. It's not just, well, I kind of have some little practical menial labor thing for you to do that just eventually it'll make sense. It's a forerunner, one
Yeah.
crying in the wilderness, make straight the paths of the Lord. You send them 2 by 2. That's always the pattern, and there are all the reasons we've mentioned before for that. But we're coming into town. It's time to start this as a processional, and just as calling humans image bearers, coming back to the very beginning in the garden, is in one way symbolic of ancient world kings would put an image of themselves at the entrance to the city to announce their possession of the city, even if it's just a statue. So sending a herald or a pair of heralds was also the same kind of practice to announce the arrival. And then the cult has its own functions we're going to get to in a second, but also is, something to tie it to, something to instigate a conversation, really.
Yeah.
If they want to just sneak their way into town because they're so freaked out about everybody that's chasing them. He says, no, I mean, it's a conversation starter. It's an icebreaker. You're here to be a herald. This is something to get people talking and get you talking to them. But he's also very forward and open about this is exactly how it's going to go. So, like Moses, I will give you the words.
Hey, Paul. Hi, Larry.
Aloha. Sorry I'm late, guys.
No worries.
Larry's in, where are you?
I'm actually in Tustin, California, in
Right
my
on.
grandson's bedroom right now. So
Good to see you made it safely.
So, yeah, Trent, I like that herald idea. They're not just gonna, sneak in. There's that initial, we're here, and we've got a purpose to serve. I like that.
It's like the big parade in Aladdin. Make way for Prince Ali. Same idea.
Yeah. Okay. Hey, I've never seen Aladdin. Sorry. I don't have to watch all those. We don't have kids, so we don't have to watch all that stuff, guys.
You've missed
Other
out.
thoughts? Other thoughts?
Yeah. In verse 3, he does say, like, if anyone asks, what are you doing? He commands them to herald him in, basically. He says the Lord has need of it. Just tells them directly. I was also thinking in verse 2, just for 1 and 2, it shows that he knows, as soon as you go to the village, you'll find a colt. Like, no one's sad about him bring it. It's like he knows it's there. It almost seems like it's describing his omniscience that, hey, this is going to be there as soon as you get there.
Well, you bring that up, and I tell you, you start reading what people have to say about this stuff, and most of the people I read are conservative writers. I mean, I don't read a bunch of flakes, but there are those that say, Jesus knew it was going to be there, and that's his omniscience, and so there you go. There's others that said, well, no, Jesus knew the guy. Jesus, it was a follower of Jesus, and and so he had kind of lined it up ahead of time, right? I mean, there's nothing overtly wrong with that idea. You'd like to think that Jesus is a pretty good networker, right? I mean, he's God after all. So does it take anything away from it if he did arrange it with somebody ahead of time? Does it matter?
I think it matters a little bit.
Okay.
In that you're right. He's a great networker, and I think that we need to always lend that to the character of Jesus, the human as he's on earth. But remember, he's also got other accounts remember, John says that all of the things that Jesus did couldn't be captured in all the books, period. So if Jesus just sort of set this up for networking, it almost takes away from the time when he tells Peter to go down to the river and there's a fish that's got a coin in it so you can pay the temple tax. So,
Right.
Yeah, he certainly could do that, but that limits the omniscience that John just sort of shed light on that I believe is a part of the heraldry here that Trent brought into light a couple moments ago.
Yeah, when you started down that path, the one I always am amazed by is when he told Nathaniel that I saw you under the tree before he met the guy. And that pretty much sealed it for Nathaniel, that it's like, all right, yeah, you are the one. You are the Messiah. So,
There's
yeah.
another facet I pick up on with this that fits in is not the fixing it up thing, Yeah, the name. Yeah. Not the fixing it up ahead of time, but the knowing it ahead of time is, the whole idea that Jesus borrowed everything. He borrowed a room to be born in. He borrowed a boat to teach from. He borrowed fish and bread to feed people. He borrowed a colt to ride into town, and he borrowed a tomb to be buried in.
Yeah.
Just like he kept telling telling his disciples, "Don't worry about tomorrow. Today has its own enough troubles." Not a sparrow falls without God knowing about it. How much more does he know about you and care about you? He's demonstrating his, resting in his faith, that what needs he has will be provided for, as a model forward for, look, I have mission. This is the next task. This is the next objective to be achieved. And if you want to get all aggressive with the words, but the tools will always be available. Don't go worrying about it. Don't go, getting desperate that, I don't have this and I don't have that. Whatever you need, it'll be there.
That's true. That also speaks to the idea of him being a sojourner. I mean, that, where it's a nice lesson for us, not to get so caught up and lining our nest, so to speak, is not only will it be provided, it's no reason to be heaping up, because he'll take care of it. And so, yeah.
Well, there's another, so I'm looking at this also, it says the village opposite you, so maybe you can actually see the village. I'm not sure about that, but anyways, the other thing is instead of saying, here's $10, go get the colt that's tied up, he's saying, use my words and just bring and come back with the colt, because they will release him. So that was the difference in, because normally you go, oh yeah, let's go exchange something for this colt, that he's telling me to go get. But it's not. It's like, it's just you will find this. Here's what to say. Give that a go.
It's an interesting perspective on that. How do we bring that forward to the 21st century? Is there something for us there, for us, that we're quick to, as you say, exchange money or goods or whatever, as opposed to,
well, the living, the Lord has need of it is kind of a not a monetary, exchangeable statement you can make,
right?
In a sense now,
right?
So to have that be the catalyst to make this work,
perhaps kind of where the note is there is, I've got to think of some scriptures like, if a man's ways please the Lord, even his enemies are at peace with him, right? And we're told, to make friends of unrighteous mammon. There's a sense that we need to be more shrewd with the resources that are availability, and then I think of James saying, and it's contextually it's a little bit out there, but you have not because you ask not. You wonder sometimes, we as followers of Christ, we're empowered to be able to do all these things. Do we really? It's kind of where Trent was too. Do we really rely on our relationship with Jesus and use that as leverage? I don't know if we can do it in the 21st century in the same way, but you just wonder if there are people out there ready to support the cause of Christ. We just haven't asked. We haven't asked. I don't know.
I also think more often God doesn't really want your stuff. God wants you.
Right.
The stuff will be there if it needs to be there, and if it's not there, then it doesn't need to be there. But like there's the thing about in Acts where Peter points out the widow that gave her last 2 coins, and he said, "Look, she gave everything. She's the one that gave more than anyone else." And of course, everybody's offended because they're giving their righteously selected portion. And he says, "Look, she's the one that's got the faith to give everything that she has to what we're doing here. And that's what we're looking for. It's not because if she only put in 2 pennies. 2 pennies aren't going to do anything. But the fact of being that willing and that giving and that all in is more what they're interested in.
Yeah, and I agree with that. But I wonder too, though, is kind of where Blake was on that. Was he definitely wants all of us, but part of what is us is our influence. Part of it is what we do in the community, right, as well. And are there those that, even if they're infidels, that would support us if we ask? And don't get me wrong. There's a group that will go out on one of the roads downtown and put their baskets out there, basically begging for Jesus, even though I think they're kind of a cult. But I kind of have an issue with that. I feel like that's not where we're supposed to be. But I'm just thinking, if a guy has a building or somebody's got a vehicle or somebody's got a field or somebody's got something, and we say, the Lord needs it, it's to ask him, let me just be really crazy for a minute, right? Let's say we wanted to be in a building as opposed to tents. Would we have the boldness to go to somebody and say, hey, we're a little church, we don't have a lot of funds. Would you let us use your building rent free? Right? I mean, I don't think we have many examples of that in our world today, but maybe churches have not asked, right? Just as an example. Right?
Yeah. I mean, that's a hypothetical. I think it's just a matter of why do you need the building? Like that's a matter for self-examination. You need a building so you look like a real church.
No, don't skew me off on that. I'm just using that as if we decided we needed a place to be able to have ministry.
Nathaniel doesn't want to sweat.
Because Nathaniel doesn't want to sweat. Setting those tents up every week is tough, bro.
Yeah. Well, I mean, if you lived here where 6 months of the year it's 40 degrees and raining, I get it.
Yeah. But just the point is, I mean, I think, we don't have, there's probably resources out there that we could be using for the kingdom that are in the hands of those who aren't of the kingdom. But we're not asking. It's just an interesting thought. It's an interesting thought. Yeah. Hi, Dan, Paula.
Hello, we're back.
Okay. So Chris started us down this road, so we're going to keep going down there. So what about the cult having never been ridden? What does that tell us, both ritually and practically? And Chris gave us part of that, I believe, on the practical side of that. But what do you guys think? The cult's never been ridden. What does that do for us? Why is that part of the equation? Chris said that it showed that Jesus could control this animal that had never been ridden. I think that probably covers the practical side. Unless you guys got something else. What about ritually? What does that kind of speak to in your minds when you think about Jewish Old Testament ritual?
I would say purity.
You would say what, Paul?
Purity, as in never been used. So a virgin cult.
And I think that's the same thing. What did you say?
Unblemished.
Unblemished?
Yeah.
Okay. So you guys are kind of going after the same idea that this is its first use. It's pure. It's right.
Uh-huh.
Anything else?
Let's see references here back to like Numbers and Deuteronomy about heifers that have never been yoked and taking them down into valleys that have never been plowed or planted and
Yeah.
go break their necks there and all that stuff.
Yeah. Yeah. I was looking at a lot of that stuff, getting ready for this thing. I don't want to take us too far out there into all that, but yeah, you're right. Same kind of thing. So if that's the case, you got something, Chris?
Lamb without spot or blemish.
Same thing that Blake was talking about. Yeah. So what is that saying then about what this cult's purpose is? What is this thing that Jesus is doing? Trent hit earlier on the idea that he was being heralded to that part. Was that you, Preston?
Yeah, but I was letting you finish your thought there.
Go ahead.
All right, did you finish?
Yeah.
Okay. So I think there's a couple more practical elements there too, and I like that Mark is the guy who's presenting it in this way with his audience, sort of John Mark writing in some ways toward the Roman mentality. So let's take a look at a couple things, and Chris is right on top of this. He didn't just come out and say this. What Jesus is about to do to ride this donkey that's never been ridden, never been done before. It's never been done before. Because you have to break this animal in order for you not only to ride it, but in order for you to put cloaks on it, because that's going to feel foreign to the animal too. So Jesus is about to do something that's never been done before. Number one. Number two, the Romans would be very familiar with a conquering king coming in on a kind of animal. And if he comes in on a horse, one of those pieces of symbology is that he's coming in as a conqueror. He's coming in probably leading some people either tattooed or through the nose to say, I'm the conqueror. I've won. But actually, Jesus is coming in on a donkey, which is a little bit different. That suggests a couple things. Number one, service, because that's the kind of animal that he is. And number two, I'm coming in peace. So let me shut up there and throw that out and see what happens.
A donkey is more humble than a horse is.
Yeah, to your point, Preston, I think we don't see at this point. Now, it's going to happen as the week progresses, but we don't see the Roman government meeting Jesus at the gate of Jerusalem, right? But if he'd been on a stallion, whole other thing. Absolutely.
I've heard a real stem winder on this subject that is kind of hard to navigate, but there's one section of it that had to do with it's important that he wasn't on the mare that this foal belongs to. It was on the foal instead, as in the throne next to the throne. You know, he would reserve the prime animal for somebody in a superior position to himself. He takes up the secondary animal, even if they're not both riding together. And I think part of the stem winder was, well, they would have taken both animals together to keep the foal happy and blah, 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 but they would have thrown the cloak over both of them to make one big seat.
That sounds conjectural.
It was a lot, but I think the most useful point out of it was the primary and secondary positioning implied.
Okay.
About completing the law, not overthrowing the law, and being right with the law. Does that have anything to, riding in on a donkey, not going to come in and shake things up as far as overthrow anything? But
Well, there's a thread of that all through the Gospels and into the book of Acts. This idea that you're talking about civil law, not the Jewish law, right?
No.
The Roman law versus the Jewish law. Or what are you talking about?
Jewish law.
Okay. Well, he fulfilled the prophetic pronouncement from Zechariah. So I don't know where you might be heading with that. You got a thought on that?
No, you're just mentioning about what a difference of a donkey would be. I'm saying, well, if the stereotype is to take away and start a new kingdom, here as it is in this chapter, so the earth is that's what the procession's for, it's not necessarily just that. It's just, well, they just go to the temple and turn around and go away, you know what I mean? So it doesn't go into that. Yeah. But yeah, with the donkey, typically maybe that wouldn't be even, be
Yeah, everything I'm thinking about to respond to you feels more New Testament than Old Testament. You know, I mean, from my perspective, because I know that the Gospels and the book of Acts certainly demonstrate the fact that fellowship of Jesus is going to, it's not going to be revolutionary from the standpoint of overthrowing governments. You know, render unto God which is God, and Caesar what is Caesar's. Right. You see that all through the book of Acts, where Paul makes it pretty clear that he's, you know, operating in a legal way. And then, you know, as I think further into the New Testament, you know, the idea that you know, we would see the king, even if it's a corrupt government, as being God's minister, so as not to overthrow. I don't know. You guys got a thought on that? I don't have anything from the Jewish law that comes to my mind as far as Jesus fulfilling the law, other than the prophecy.
Bruce, you know, and I appreciate you trying to comb for information about the Jewish law. I don't see an issue here with the Jewish law. I really do appreciate that it's being fulfilled in watching Zechariah and some of the Old Testament prophets coming into fruition. But I do see this as potentially encroaching on Roman civil law, that had Jesus come in on a stallion, on a horse with this processional, Pilate would already have been involved, as opposed to the secret sort of machinations that needed to go on behind the scenes. But with this donkey and with the way that this processional happened, the Romans were not threatened by this at all.
That's it, because, you know, we know a lot of people that were going on then wanted him to be that earthly leader, that earthly Messiah, that zealot that was going to overthrow the Roman government. But that's not what he was demonstrating at all, in any way, shape, form, or fashion. And so, you know, he did stay within the confines of the Roman law as he did all of this. So that led me to ask the question. So we see we see Matthew, and he's quoting Zechariah. We see the other gospel writers, and they certainly are showing the people to be in pretty much a lather about Jesus, and it all seems to kind of point to this idea of him as this Messiah, wrongly in their mind. I mean, they were seeing the earthly leader versus the, you know, God. But why do you think Mark so downplays the messianic aspects of Jesus's ride in Jerusalem? I mean, it ends up just basically being, you know, he rides in while the people are singing from the Psalms. You know, they put the you know, the fronds and the clothes down, but that's kind of it. And then he just goes in and takes a stroll around the temple complex. So, you know, why is this just part and parcel of who Mark was, and how he wrote the gospel, or is there some other reason, do you think, that he might be just really downplaying the messianic aspects of this compared to the other guys and the
Well,
people?
I think that the way he's written so far in this gospel, that he is showing a side of Jesus that perhaps the other writers weren't. As we've talked about before, that verse, or chapter 10, verse 45, for even the Son of Man did not come to be served, but to serve. So Jesus is, his take on Jesus is more as a servant.
Yeah, I like that, Paula. You know, to that end, I was reviewing this week and really what the perspectives are on the four Gospels, and I didn't write the pastor's name down. It's something I read actually on Blue Letter Bible, which I like Blue Letter Bible. A lot of good commentary stuff on there. He made the point that Matthew demonstrated Jesus as the son of David, King of the Jews. Mark, he was the Son of Man, the servant to all. Luke, the son of Adam, the perfect man, the perfect human. And then certainly John, the Son of God, he was divine. Right? So those are really the four aspects of that and their audiences that receive that. So, yeah, Paula, from that perspective, I can get on board with you as far as that's concerned. That he wanted to keep Jesus within that servant role on that cult where he was.
Right.
Other thoughts on that, or different thoughts on that, guys? Here or there?
I think we've kind of banged a little bit on the what audience he's writing to.
Yep.
Where Matthew's more of a Jewish audience and needs to speak in Jewish terms. This is more of a Hellenized and Roman audience.
Yeah, the Roman mindset, right?
Yeah, so it's a little bit more just straightforward facts, but don't step on toes where you don't have to.
That's a good way to say that, actually, right? I mean, they had their own God, so to speak. So, in their minds. All right, so we get into town, and you guys, if you go back and you read Matthew, I think it's Matthew. Matthew brings him in, and he actually compresses it all and starts turning over tables in the temple. We're not going to look at that until next week. And Mark, he essentially comes into Jerusalem, looks around, and then goes home. And the thought process is, we're not sure. You know, somebody made the statement that he walked from Jericho. It's like, well, no. If you read the parallels, I mean, he's been around. He might have boogied out a little bit just because of the heat that was going on with Lazarus, but there's no reason to think that he was miles and miles away. But it was late. It took a while for the pilgrims to all get into town, and by the time he's there, so why do you think he took the time to look around? Why do you go in the temple and take a look around? Is it just, hey, I like the place, haven't been here a while, or is there something more to it than that, do you think? Had he heard something? What?
It's like Chevy Chase and Vacation at the Grand Canyon.
Wow. Oh, what an image. Gotta make time. I just kind of think, no, that's probably not the case. That's hilarious.
I think he's about to tie the next couple of things, as John, Mark, and Peter document. In some regard, they're not bigger than the triumphal entry, but they're going to be significant in terms of their prophetic impact. And I think Peter is helping to set the stage, almost in the way that when he and James and John were on the Mount of Transfiguration, they knew things that they were unable to really say until after his resurrection. And what Jesus does next, the temple, and then this growing, well, this tree is pretty significant. So I'll pause there unless you ask me more questions, and that's where I think almost Mark's emphasis is, as opposed to the other New Testament writers.
So you see Mark as basically, he wanted to get Jesus into the city because he's got things he wants him to do in the narrative. And the ride in isn't nearly as important to him as what's coming next.
Right, because the ride, even though it's significant as to the Jewish folks having a temporary acceptance of Jesus from who they think he is, what Jesus is going to have lasting impact when we look at it through a historical lens and a Jewish lens.
Okay, all right. And he, based on the number of lines of scripture, I think it backs it up, what you're saying. because he certainly puts a lot more emphasis on those things. I mean, next week it gets pretty gnarly there for a while in our continuation through here. All right. Other thoughts?
Well, traditionally this occurred on Palm Sunday.
Right.
You know, back then the Sabbath was Saturday, and everybody would have taken the entire day off from doing anything and everything, especially in Jerusalem and especially in the temple environment. Sunday is kind of a catch-up day. A lot of people are kind of just catching back up on doing the stuff around the house, doing the stuff around their market stall or whatever, just because it took a day off from doing the chores. It probably doesn't have much of an audience. It just kind of as a practical application. He needs to come in and make a show of clearing the temple. If there's nobody there, it's not much of a show.
So you see it very practically from the standpoint of they were willing to essentially come into the city with him, but now they've got things to do.
Yeah.
So he's going to have to wait until tomorrow when everybody's kind of back in the flow of business, so to speak.
Yeah. I mean, I think there's probably larger significances about the whole timing of the week. There's, you know, I'm not, without doing any weird numerology stuff, just
Yeah. Let's not go there. Let's not do that. The lost day and all that stuff. Yeah. And Palm Monday. We've heard all that stuff.
Yeah.
It's kind of crazy because there's a day missing. You know, it's kind of interesting though, is that I hear what you're saying about everybody needing, but these folks were coming in from everywhere, right? I guess maybe to your point, they got to town. Now it's time to go get some provisions and find a place to bed down, or go see my cousin, or whatever we need to do.
Well, I mean, clearly they've been out in the fields or among the trees or whatever. They were out tending to their farms and orchards and stuff, which weren't in the city. And that's a pretty common pattern of life in that part of the world. Even now, you know, all of the agriculture occurs just outside the city, but the people don't necessarily live on their own land the way we do with farms here. It's everybody lives in town, goes out and tends the plants for the day or tends the animals for the day. On their way back in, oh, by the way, I had some palm trees or some palm trees.
Yeah, but I think what I'm getting at though is it's different. I mean, I'm thinking about the people who aren't residents of Jerusalem or Bethany or Bethphage, right? I mean, they're, you know, what have I got?
Called the feast of arrival.
Yeah, they're there. They've come from all over. I mean, and this is the one. It's interesting if you read, well, especially when we're going to talk about the fig tree here in a minute, but there's commentators that say that they think that really Jesus came in. This was actually the Feast of the Tabernacles, and that it was going to be a 6-month sojourn in Jerusalem. There's nothing that basically backs that up, but not to mention the fact, you know, well, never mind. But if they were going to come to Jerusalem for one feast of the year, they usually come for the Passover. That's what they normally come for. You know, they were supposed to come for 3, but practice had reduced that to 1 by Jesus's day. So, yeah, I'm just thinking, you know, the city swells by who knows, you know, factors during the Passover. So there's a lot of people kicking around, but that's why I think, you know, they've got to find a place to stay, or they're going to stay with their cousin, or, you know, they're willing to march into town. But it's just interesting that once he got to town that the crowd dissipated, and he's kind of there left at the temple. To your point, Trent, kind of them, those 12, maybe a few hangers on, right? It's getting dark.
I have a thought. Now, we are on the last question in this section, right?
Yeah.
That taking the time to look around the temple.
Yeah.
I see Jesus, in a sense, in this book, he calls himself the Son of Man so many times, and he knows that the outcome of this week will be that this whole concept of God's house, being the temple, is going to come to an end. And I think it's kind of maybe a walk of nostalgia in there too, that he's looking around to see what has become of his father's house.
Interesting. Well, there'll definitely be a change in focus after this. There's no doubt about that. The temple was going to stay around for about another 40 years, but he wouldn't be here either. I like your nostalgia idea, whatever the motivation behind that may be. All right, everybody's looking at me. Jesus uses a Mac. I don't know that. We'll have to have that conversation next week. Oh my. All right, so let's look at the fig tree. We're only going to see the first part of this. We'll get the rest of it next week. The lesson happens next week, but we get the first part of it, the miracle this week. It says, now the next day when they had come out from Bethany, he was hungry. Seeing from afar a fig tree having leaves, he went to see if perhaps he would find something on it. When he came to it, he found nothing but leaves, for it was not the season for figs. In response, Jesus said to it, let no one eat fruit from you ever again. And his disciples heard it. This is a lot of scholars are troubled, I think is a good word. They're really troubled by these three verses. They have a lot of issues with it. I mentioned a couple here, but it's just funny how sometimes the little things are the ones that get these guys all jacked up. So first off, and I mentioned the fact that they were talking about, fig trees and all that, or him coming 6 months earlier. I mean, Mark pretty much makes it clear that it wasn't the season for figs, and essentially the figs would have started to leaf out in March and April. This sounds very much like a lot of parts of the U.S., right? I mean, the leaves would come out in March and April, and they would start to fruit in June, July, August, September. That's when they would have the figs on them. They sometimes would have kind of some preliminary figs, but they weren't very good. I mean, they were kind of almost like false figs that they would have early on, but you wouldn't want to eat those. They were nasty. And so at this time of the year in April in Jerusalem, the fig trees aren't going to have fruit, which Mark makes the point of. And so, Jesus goes over to it, and when he sees that it doesn't have anything, he says, there's going to be no fruit from you ever again. And this is where there's commentators on this that feel like that Jesus got angry and that he was frustrated and when it didn't have, but again, if we go back to our conversation about the colt and about some other things that Jesus has done, don't you think Jesus knew that there weren't going to be any figs on the tree?
Yep.
I mean, huh? Yeah. I mean, he knew that. Not the least of which he's from Israel. So, I mean, it's not a struggle to think that they would be there. And so you have to, at that point, say there's something else going on. That's the whole point. That's where we need to kind of see that. So many consider this episode to be either, I've heard it called a living parable or an object lesson. And so the idea here is that the leaves on the tree present this promise of some sort of underlying fruit, that there's leaves on it, it's living, so at least there should be some production out of this plant, is the idea. But instead, even though it's got the leaves, it's got no fruit, which shows that the plant, in essence, is useless at this juncture. Right? It has nothing, it has no fruit, it has nothing to commend it to anybody. It's just a leafy bush, for what it's worth. And so when Jesus says, let no one eat fruit from you ever again, this is really a picture of judgment. Because you are not fruitful, you're being judged. Does that make sense?
Yes.
So why then? And this is referred to as a destruction miracle. And it's not something you see in the Gospels, hardly at all. Perhaps the only other destruction miracle that we see in Mark's Gospel is when the demons leave Legion and go into the pigs, and the pigs run down the hill and they die. I mean, some people said, well, it's not really a destruction miracle, but it's one of the times we really see where some action of Jesus leads to something being destroyed, right? Or dismantled, whatever you want to call it. So why do you think he's highlighting this at this point? And I'll follow that up with, who's he talking about?
Well, if you consider it to be a parable, then you would have to say that the Old Covenant and the temple system is the fig tree, and it's going to be judged.
The Old Covenant?
Yeah, well, because the Old Covenant, the old Jewish way of doing things.
But did God, okay, I understand where you're heading, but did God judge that?
Well, I'm just using it as a parable because you had used the saying that some people thought it was a living parable, so that's where I'm going with that. He's not physically to judge it; he's just using that as a parable.
Okay, the reason I was kind of hesitating on that is I don't see that. I don't see God's judgment on the law or that.
Nope, got to use the word parable.
What is that? What is that? How does that work? The parable is the tree itself and not having fruit and being destroyed. That's the parable. So the underlying truth behind the parable is what is the judgment? And so I thought what you were saying was that the sacrificial system and the law and the temple were being destroyed or judged. Is that what you're saying, Paula? Am I missing that?
I think judged might be a little harsh.
Yeah.
that might not be the word I would go after, but
right. Well,
just
that's why I asked.
Picture of the old way.
Okay.
You know, the new wineskins, the old wineskin. You know, that kind of a.
Okay. Yeah, I definitely wouldn't say if judgment is the picture we're giving here, then I don't think that would be applicable.
Okay.
I like the thought, but I heard somebody.
I would say just the tree is a picture of Israel, and that it's growing leaves, like it's showing off, like it's still keeping the law, still doing the sacrifices, it's keeping the Sabbath, but no one can sustain on it, no one can live off of it because it's not bearing the fruit it's supposed to.
Okay, you're saying Israel. All of Israel?
The temple, at least.
The temple. All right, you're on the temple too. Why is the temple being judged?
I didn't say judge. I just said no one's living off of it.
No one's living what?
No one's getting the life they need from it.
Okay. All right.
I'm not saying judge.
Okay.
From the old to the new.
The old for the new. So you're kind of in on that whole wineskin thing as well, Chris.
Like Paul's idea. It's not a judgment of the old. It's just a pronouncement of the transition from the old to the new.
Okay, so you're kind of in the same boat with Paul to a certain extent. See, none of you guys want to take me serious on the idea that the word judgment is very clear here. This is a judgment. All right.
I got you. If you say that, if he says that, may no one ever eat fruit from you again, that implies that someone's eaten fruit from it before, but in this off season. So what fruit doesn't want eaten would be the kind that doesn't produce nutrition to his body. So anyways, eating the good fruits from God is what you prefer. So if it's always going to be, or if there's bad fruits in it, then let it never have bad fruits and no one cares again, but only good fruits.
Okay. Okay. So you're seeing that it was good for something at some point, and now it's not good for something
Yeah.
at some point. And since it's not, then I'm done with you.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. You might be onto something.
I think it's important that his disciples heard him say it.
I think that's an amazing phrase that's there. His disciples heard it.
And I hear something of Paul telling Timothy to be ready to preach the word in season and out of season.
Okay.
Because these guys are about to be very out of season.
Yeah.
You know, only one of them is still going to be standing in front of the cross to actually personally witness all of the events all the way to the end. The rest of them are going to kind of scatter for a little bit. They're gonna,
Right.
Peter, the favored, the one who's the church is going to be built on, and then the whole deal, is going to personally deny him 3 times. I think he's not necessarily saying so much about, well, too bad Jerusalem, or too bad Temple, or too bad everything that happened in the Old Testament. I think he's saying, well, since we're going up to the temple and some stuff's about to happen, and the the things you see me do, me being Jesus, are about to change from what we've done so far. He's trying to. It's not an old for the new, Old Testament economy or New Testament economy. It's old for the new. I was the teacher and you were the students. Now you guys are about to be the teachers. And of course, he uses agricultural metaphors all over the place. He's the tree, he's the vine, and they're the branches, and et cetera, et cetera.
So, all right. So you're kind of catching the backside of this thing, but they heard this and they heard it. They maybe didn't understand it. They were going to get there at some point.
Primarily because it was for them rather than an everybody or a grand sweeping statement.
All right. So then what's the parable? What's his point?
I think it's the handoff. He's the source of everything, but he's been the teacher. He's the center of their world, and they've been the students. They're called disciples.
Okay.
Shortly, he's going to stop going around healing people and going around feeding people and going around teaching people. The teaching's done. The signs and wonders are done. Now it's time to just do the work and move on and hand the entire program off to a group of apostles rather than a group of students. So if they're going to be the ones doing the teaching and the spreading and the grafting new branches onto the vine, they need to be ready in season and out of season. And this tree is an example of one that isn't.
Well, now you finally got kind of, and I think what you're saying is they needed to hear it because they're going to need to be able to give this message as they go forward.
Yeah.
Let me give you guys a thought, and I'm not saying it's the only interpretation of this that's out there, but it seems to be kind of an ongoing majority idea, is that Jesus was really speaking, and John, you talked about Israel. I think there's a subset of Israel that he's very much talking about here. He is going to, Preston brought up the fact a few minutes ago that we're going to spend a lot of time over the next week having some pretty intense conversations. And Matthew probably lines this up way more than Mark does. But Jesus is going to have his whole, brood of vipers sermon pretty soon. And what the message that they were going to need to take with them as they went forward, if you will, is you can have think of the leaves, if you will. Think of the leaves as just that outward appearance, right? That beautiful outward appearance. The promise, as I said, of fruitfulness, of something that is of worth to the kingdom, right? It's analogous to Jesus's idea of the whitewashed tombs, or looking at the outside of the cup while the inside of the cup is filthy, right? We see all those kind of different images that Jesus presents in the Gospels. The leaves give that impression that this is going to be a useful, productive plant. But at this point, it is not. There's nothing there. It's essentially already, I'm just really stretching it a little bit, it's already, as far as its usefulness, dead. Right? I mean, it's a living plant, it's alive, but if I needed it today, it might as well be dead, is the whole point. And so Jesus says to it, well, you know what? If this is where you are, I'm done with you. And it really is a picture, in a very real sense, of the religiosity of that day. The thing that was going to plague, and I preached out of Galatians on Sunday. It's the thing that plagued the early church. And Paula, you talked about the law, and John, you jumped in and we're talking about the temple, and I think, Chris, you were talking about the old versus the new. I mean, what the challenge is that there were so many that the early church dealt with who presented the picture of being good and useful and holy, but all they were was stuck in the law. They were religion people. They were religion. There wasn't anything of any worth. And Jesus is basically, and the reason there's a picture of judgment there, it's like, well, if you're going to be stuck in that, if you're going to be a hypocrite and you're going to present yourself as being this holy person, but in actuality you're dead inside, then you've already brought your own judgment upon yourself, if that makes any sense. And so in a very real sense, as you look at this interaction that Jesus has in verses 12 through 14, it's him condemning the hypocrisy of the culture of that time. And so that's why when you said Israel, John, I was like, what part of Israel? Because obviously there's a lot of people in Israel that were going to follow after Jesus. A lot weren't, but there were going to be those who did. So we couldn't look at it. We can't look at it from a national perspective. We can look at it from people who think like the rich young ruler did, right? Who said, I kept all the law. I'm good. But you're not. You're not, because there's really no fruit within you, right? And so that's really why, because Jesus is now, over the next week, going to be pounding up against that as the Jewish leaders, take their final licks with him prior to the crucifixion. So that seems to be why he positions it right here where he does.
Yeah.
Yeah.
He's still hungry.
Yes.
Yeah. So, but the other place where he comes down when it says he's hungry is after 40 days, so, he's hungry. So that's when he comes down.
Right.
But anyways, to hear a statement like that on a tree where it's obvious that, it's not there to bear fruit because it's not seasoned, but yet then what do you expect type of deal. So we haven't gotten further or anything like that, but to hear those words is different. So I don't know if I would necessarily think it as a judgment of anything other than an awesomeness of a man having a statement to a tree for disappointment reasons, and then they got to figure out what the heck that means.
Yeah, well, see, that's where it gets weird. That's why I think a lot of theologians have an issue with it because it's like, well, okay, it's April. They don't have figs. It's not supposed to have figs. Jesus would know that. Jesus, you know, I mean, it's the whole thing. So one may wonder that when it says, you know, Jesus was hungry, you know, that was really the beginning, if you will, of the parable. I'm not saying that he wasn't, right? It says it very clearly. Yeah. But them knowing that and seeing him going there, they may have been going, what's up with the fig tree, Jesus? Not going to be anything there. Even fishermen from Galilee would know that. And so what's the point that he's trying to make there? Right.
Right.
Other thoughts?
If it looks like a church and you go into it, you know, and then
Yeah.
it's not there, you know, and
Yeah.
it doesn't matter, you know, you're like, oh, well, it's not this time or whatever, you know. But
Well, that's kind of an interesting drawing that comparison to where he walked into the temple too, right? I mean, that's the next day, obviously. But I'm sure that people will walk into the church hungry. Don't want to stretch the picture too far.
yeah, you walk up to a fig tree, you know, and you can kind of, it's like you already are pretty set on what a fig kind of tastes like, you know, you kind of get that really set in already type of deal, and why you allow yourself to start thinking about that and then go up to it anyways. But he has his disciples there also observing this too. So were they hungry for figs too?
Probably if he was, right?
Maybe, yeah. So they must have been.
Anybody want to jump in on that one?
Well, another stretch. It's probably like pretty low down, but it carries a little indictment with it. Is that there are a lot of prophetic mentions of the time when everyone will sit under his own vine and his own fig tree and be at peace and all that stuff.
Yeah.
And he's indicating there are some allusions to Jerusalem as city of David being the vine that all of Israel depends on as branches. And he makes a point about I'm the vine and you're the branches, as opposed to the temple is the vine. So he's saying that ain't the vine and this ain't the fig tree. Y'all ain't gonna sit under this and be at peace. Not right now.
See where I thought you might go with that. And, you know, it's kind of it's a tough chapter of scripture, or at least the first part of it is Isaiah 5, where it talks about Jesus in his garden, right? He expected it to be all of this verdant and just providing everything. And it ends up basically just being briars and brambles, and he has to take it out. And I'm sure there are those that try to connect this on a grander scale. But I think we just have to be careful. And the reason I say, you know, because I think very much when he says, you know, no fruit will ever come from you. I mean, there's a sense of judgment there. We have to be careful with Israel that we don't fall into a trap, you know, that he's not done with Israel yet. I just always, if you guys ever wonder, I kind of run really hard from that, because there's this idea of replacement theology, that the church has replaced Israel and that God doesn't want Israel anymore, and that's wrong. All you got to do is look at Romans 9, 10, and 11, and you very much see that God has a plan for Israel. See him in the book of Revelation. See him other places. And so, I just want to, that's why I always pump the brakes when I ever hear Israel in judgment in the same phrase, in the same scene.
I see. Okay, yeah, I totally hear you. I guess I did say something that sounded like that, because I totally don't believe that Israel has been replaced by the church.
And I know you don't believe that, because you know I've had that conversation, so I knew you didn't believe that. That was pretty prevalent back in the early 20th century, and it's just a heresy.
Yeah.
It's not prevalent.
What?
It's not prevalent.
You're right.
now.
It's still plenty of it running around. Is that what you're saying? Yeah. And that's a interesting thing, because if you look at some of the ministries and national ministries out there, whether it's Friends of Israel or Jews for Jesus or or some of them, I mean, they spend a fair amount of time having to correct that with people. As much as their ministry is about leading Jewish people to Christ, they also have to defend Israel from that replacement theology era.
Well, and every time you hear about a shining city on a hill, that's where that comes from.
Right. Right.
Well, I would also just the phrase, may no one ever eat fruit from you again, whether it's talking about a fig tree or not. In this situation, it's good that it came out of his mouth, because I would take those words and no one and say that to the Antichrist. And these are very nice words to deliver at that time.
Yeah. Right. Yeah.
So, like I don't know how you said it, or something that has a destruction to it, a destruction miracle.
A destruction miracle is what it's referred to. Yeah, don't see a lot of those.
Right. But it might have been something good to hear. To me, it'd be a phrase, if I heard it coming from Jesus, it'd be something that I would take note of with my ears.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah. Definitely got his disciples' attention. There's no doubt about that.
Not to be too extremely eschatological with it, though. We all try to act like the tree is standing in for somebody and is getting cursed. Why not? The tree has its lifetime, whether it's a natural life or it gets cut off early. We'll see that it's withered the next day. You might be saying something about the people who would get a chance to eat from that tree, but they won't because of coming events.
Oh, yeah.
And indeed he returns to the Mount of Olives to talk about some coming events where people will be running for the hills and all that's in Matthew.
Yes, he does. The Olivet Discourse.
So they're not going to be potentially, symbolically at least, they're not going to be around to enjoy the fruits of that tree again.
Okay. Yeah, I see you kind of coming at it from a different direction.
At least not in a certain sense. And then, of course, the tree just withers up anyway, so the time has come for things to move forward.
Right. Which I think is kind of that's a theme I think a lot of people saw in that, that new wineskin versus old wineskin idea. But yeah, you're right. There's going to be a coming time, as Jesus is going to describe. We're not going to see that in Mark.
Yeah.
But you can read that over in Olivet Discourse in Matthew 20, 23, 24, 24, and 25, 23 and 24, I think. So, all right. Anything else from you guys? Kind of worked it over.
Yeah, Pastor, I'd like to reserve the right to revisit this, Lord willing, next week. I think when you talk and mention strongly that there's a judgment component in this parable, I don't know that we've milked that well enough. I really do think that maybe there's judgment potentially in three arenas. One on the nation of Israel, one potentially on the temple system, and maybe third, mankind in and of itself. And I have to be careful there because Jesus says this time when he comes, he's not coming to condemn, correct? Because even though there's a conviction of mankind, the punitive component is not going to happen until later. But the reason I'd like to revisit it is because we only did the first 14 verses or so of this chapter. When we get to the end, he's going to make a statement, and that statement's going to lend itself to, I think, something I've read in a book that says, without faith, it's impossible to please God. I think I've read that. And then Troy's been dancing all around this thing tonight about one of the great I am statements. I am the vine, you are the branches. Apart from me, fill in the blank. We're studying that right now. So I think that there's an indictment that maybe we'll need to revisit, and that Peter sees this, and there's going to be repercussions in the future, perhaps, when they have the Jerusalem Council, when Paul has to teach them that the temple is no more and is no good. So I think that there's some things to be perhaps revisit without making our heads spiral off our bodies next week, but it may not make sense until we get to the faith that Jesus ends with. But we haven't read that this week, so I don't know what I'm talking about.
Yeah, we haven't read that part yet. I'm still, I understand the context within what you just said, I'm always hesitant about putting judgment on either the temple or Israel, and certainly they experienced a pretty major downturn in AD 70. There's no doubt about that. Yeah, we'll have time to talk about that next week, I think. So we'll talk some historical stuff there as well. So get revved up. All right, ladies and gentlemen, I think we'll call it a night. Thank you for being here tonight. We will continue on with Mark chapter 11, looking at Jesus cleansing the temple. That's where we start next week. So that's a great episode. So we'll enjoy that a great deal, I think. Let's have a word of prayer.